The advice and opinions expressed by Dr. Granpeesheh and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh is the
Dr. Doreen is an expert in autism.
Doreen Granpeesheh.
Dr. Granpeesheh.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh is a visionary in the field of autism. Now you can ask her questions on Ask Dr. Doreen.
Good morning and welcome to Ask Dr. Doreen. I'm
morning.
Shannon Penrod. I'm here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh.
Good morning, Shannon. Good morning, everyone.
So good to be here with you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We have not been here because we weren't here last week because of the holiday week. And,
All right.
and then I think the week before we weren't here together. So good to be here
Good
with
to be
you.
back.
And good to be here with all of you. Want to remind all of you we're live right now. Today is Tuesday, July 9th. The year is 2024. We are live right now and taking live questions. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and about a dozen other sites. And our wonderful Chris Desmond is going to show those to you on the screen. If you're listening to us in podcast, we want to encourage you to tootle over at some point and check out the visual of the show on our YouTube channel. But we are available wherever you get your podcasts for free. And we hope that you will be listening to us whenever you're doing whatever it is that you're doing. I do want to point out that when you download the podcast for free, it is not free really, but it's just free to you. And that's why you will notice that there are some advertisements on the podcast. We hope you will embrace that and be happy and think this is why it's free for me because these people sponsored the show. If that is something that a few of you have written in and said, I would rather pay a little bit and have it with no ads. You have the opportunity to do that by going to wonderfulglow.fm/autism-live. When you go there, all you have to do is pay $5 a month. It's actually even cheaper if you do it for a year. You will get everything that the Autism Network does, and you will get it ad-free for that simple $5 a month. So we encourage you, if that's important to you, that you do that. That includes Ask Dr. Doreen, all the Autism Lives, all the parent-to-parent, everything else, including today's Hyperfixation, which is our newest podcast. So I hope that you guys will check that out. I also like to remind everybody at the start of an Ask Dr. Doreen that this is a wonderful opportunity to hear from an amazing expert. Dr. Granpeesheh is a true expert in this field and has been working in this field for more than 45 years. I always used to mumble it, but it's, a crazy accomplishment and you deserve the kudos for that. You certainly don't look like that could possibly have happened since you look like you're 41. That's like, on your roughest day, you look like you're 41, but you've been working in this field for 45 years, more than that. And however, this is a podcast format. And so there's no way for you to have eyes on the situation. So when you write in, be as specific as possible about what it is that's going on for you or someone that you love on the autism spectrum, and ask your question. And we may have more questions, both of us, that we ask back. So we love it when you interact live. But there is no way to give individually specific advice in this format.
Right.
The great news is that you have the opportunity to pick Dr. Granpeesheh's brain, Ask Dr. Doreen, that's why it's called that, so that then you can go back to the experts who do have eyes on the situation to get more done,
right,
and make more progress and be more fair to the individual, because that is your mantra. I am going to get t-shirts made at some point. It has to be fair, with the quote from Dr. Doreen. I also want to say that our topic today, we had a question that came in 2 weeks ago, and we got to it right at the end of the program. And the question was, can you please talk about the differences between ABA and Gestault? Am I saying it correctly? Gestault. And is it counterproductive to use them both together? You gave a quick answer, but said you would really like more time to talk about that.
Sure.
We had more questions about speech in general. So we thought we would talk about speech. And I see that we've already got Rodney here. Hi, Rodney. And that Reza already has a question that we'll get to in just a minute. So
great.
Wonderful. So that's our topic for today, but you can write in about absolutely anything. And we do appreciate your questions. It always happens that at the second half of the hour is when the questions pour in.
Right.
And you can watch my blood pressure go up because I'm like, we're not going to get to all of them.
Yeah.
But so please write in as early as possible, and I'll try to remind you at the half hour, and then so you can watch my ears turn red.
Yeah. The sooner you write in, the better. That's good.
Yeah. It's always best.
Okay.
But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about speech and what's
Gestault.
and Gestault.
Yeah.
And what's counterproductive. And I think there's this misconception too with ABA that you can only do ABA and not do other things.
Right. But it's important to, obviously you can do a lot of other things, but the point is that you don't want to get the child confused.
Yeah.
So Gestalt comes from the term Gestalt, which means whole, right? And the very first, I guess, example of Gestalt in psychology was a series of tests that were done to show neuropsychological tests to show that, you know, when you have like let's say if you draw a line that is 3/4 of a circle, most people have the inclination to know how to complete it, right? And we all complete it the same,
Okay.
right? Because we are familiar with the shape and we have an urge. Then it kind of led into this whole area of psychology, Gestalt therapy, which had to do with putting things in the way that we see them in our environment, or completing things. It has to do with completion of things so that they fit in with what we're used to, right? Then someone took it and applied it to the concepts of autism and basically came up with the theory that some children on the spectrum learn in whole things like sentences, language. They script before they understand the pieces.
Okay.
So that's important because then it developed into like this whole area of teaching, which has to do with actually and there are lots of kids who script, right? That we know this. And sometimes you cannot get, this is very true, you can't get individual sentences or individual words from the child, or even get validate comprehension from the child of individual words, but they take full scripts, let's say from something they've watched on TV, and they use it to communicate. It's not always the appropriate use, but over time, they kind of figure out how to use those sentences. It's very clear from the beginning that they're using these scripts to try to communicate. And
But
there are
that's
lots
a
of
very
kids,
specific thing.
but there are a lot of children who do script. Like, I feel it's I mean, I don't know what percentage, I've never really tracked it that way, but I do know that it's a common question that parents will ask me or will tell me, oh yeah, he scripts. And I'll be like, okay, from what? And they'll tell me like, you know, his favorite TV shows, right? So, and I know immediately that when a child is taking sentences out of a TV show and using it, they're trying very hard to communicate, right?
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. Because listen, from a child's experience, like if you put yourself, and you know, I'd like to do this all the time. It's like, can I put myself in that child's position and experience the world? They hear us talking and they might not understand it for whatever reason. Think of it as a foreign language, right? But they memorize key sentences that, and they're like, oh, this sounds like that. It's like babbling, you know, I'm going to use this. So I can get that. I understand that they are using it for communicative intent. The question is, if you go with that, and you start with, let's say, 5 different scripts, right? Sentences. Are you then, the reason, so this is very easy, like for people, it's funny because right now I'm going through a tech change at Skills, like and if you build something in wholes, let's say you build something in sentences that are 5 words each, right? Then you can next step is to try to teach the individual to break those into individual parts so that those parts can be used, right? If you have 5 sentences that are each 5 words, that's 25 single items that can be used in combination with each other. But when you script, that's not what's happening. What's happening is you're limited to 5.
Right.
Those 5 sentences. ABA is the opposite, right? You teach the parts so that you can combine them. You can say blue truck or red truck. You can say under or over, or you know what I mean? So that's kind of the difference. And I just don't know if a child learns scripts first, if their language processing becomes faster after that, if you allow the subparts, or if you teach them from scratch.
Interesting.
Don't know.
Irony for me is that when on the day that my son was diagnosed, the developmental pediatrician, I asked about what we should do because he had been talking and then he wasn't. And she told me not to do ABA. And I said, but I want him to be able to talk again. And she said, all they will do is teach him rote phrases and he won't understand it and he'll be a robot.
Yep.
And I was like, well, then we're not doing that.
Yeah.
But that's how she described ABA. And then, of course, we found that to be the exact opposite.
Right.
That he was taught how to learn.
Yes.
And then he
use
learned.
those language. And what you just said is so important, Shannon, because it made me realize something else about Gestalt. Okay, so if you have 5 full scripts that you tend to use pretty commonly or in various situations, and they meet your needs, you're going to be less motivated to learn more.
Yeah.
And with ABA, it's not, that doesn't happen because your motivation is completely associated with reward all the time. So you are basically taught to increase your words as opposed to use them individually, right? You initially are rewarded for using 1 word, then 3 words, then, you know, descriptive, then so on and so forth. So I think they're quite different.
If anybody is watching that knows an adult that was given Gestalt language and is now an adult speaking, I'd love to, talk with them and see what their language is like.
Yes.
That would be fascinating to me. Okay, we got a bunch of questions that have come in. Reza said, my 10-year-old grandson says no to everything. Please help us. Love you, ladies. We love you back. No to everything.
Yeah, so Reza, I don't know if your grandson... please let us know. Is he understanding the meaning of no, or has that just become a generalized response? Does he, when he says no to everything, does he literally mean no, or is that just basically him saying that because he thinks that's a response that he should give? If he is test out and see, would he say no to his absolute favorite reinforcers if they're offered to him? So let us know about that so we can talk about it a little bit more.
Okay, and we'll cycle back to that. Andrea has written in and said, good morning, ladies. My 4.5-year-old son has been in 40 hours a week ABA therapy for 2 years now. He is over and generalized, imitating others. He copies everything. For example, will even follow the dogs outside and lifts his leg when they pee. How do we fix this? And is this something that he'll grow out of, or do we need to get it under control? The RBTs block him from copying others, but I also want him to know when
he should copy and when it's too much.
Thank you.
Yes, exactly. And you are right, Andrea, and that's exactly what they need to be teaching him. And it is important to get it under control. And I don't know exactly his current level of comprehension. 4.5 is a little bit young, but there's a point where we start to teach kind of what is right and wrong, kind of rule-governed behavior. So that you can either continue doing what they're doing, which is certain things are just not what you copy and other things are what you copy. Or if he has the ability to memorize lists, he could be given a list right now. And this is important because you do not want him in school, for instance, to start copying the bad behavior of other kids who might be misbehaving, for instance, or unsafe behavior, or, there's lots of behavior we do not want him to imitate. So they could either continue in the environment just blocking him from things that are not supposed to be imitated and rewarding him for things that are imitated, or they could start teaching the kind of the formula, the rule behind it, which is then they would have to heavily go into what are good behaviors and what are not good behaviors. And I don't know if he's able to go there yet, because 4.5 is very young, and teaching, approved of or appropriate behaviors and inappropriate behaviors is more kind of something that develops a little bit later, more like 6, 7. So I would maybe suggest that they continue to just block that and reward imitation of appropriate behavior, so that he can start differentiating between things that he gets rewarded for and things that he's told not to do.
Amazing. And Armin, I have repositioned the microphone. Please let me know if you're still having issues with it. Sorry about that. Sarah has written in and said, this is a question for both Shannon and Dr. Doreen. My boys are now 5 years old. This is one of the most amazing things about doing this show for so long, is that people come in. We have one mom who's been watching the show from the beginning, and her son was 3 when she started watching, and her son is, like 16 years old now.
That's awesome.
Sarah's boys are now 5, and I feel like we've been there since they were like 2.5. She says they are processing well, but still struggle with sharing their day, despite having the language. Is that normal? And she also wants to know, how long did my son take to be fully conversational? And it's funny because I don't,
it happens gradually.
Yeah. So I don't remember a given day. I do remember there's an assessment that they would have me take on a regular basis where in the beginning I just hated it.
Yeah.
Because it would say, how many back and forth volleys in a conversation.
Right.
And I would want to just flip it off. I would be like, no, I'm here because we don't do that, right?
Yeah.
And then I remember there was a time when I was like, oh, no, we can go back and forth once. And then we can go back and forth twice.
Yeah.
And then we can do it 3 times. And then I stopped counting when we could go back and forth 7 times because we were just having a conversation. Gradual. But I feel like, and then it continued to grow. But I feel like at 7 was when he could do 7 back and forth volleys.
Yeah.
Now, I feel like I'm going to say this with love about my husband. We're still working on that with my husband. You know what I mean?
Me too.
Like, I do think that there is a difference in how men communicate.
For sure.
So I don't think you're ever done growing communication with men.
Yes.
Does that sound sexist?
No. It's not. It's men are from Mars, women are from Venus as well, in the sense that I think it's the topic as well, right?
Yes.
Like a man, like I know my husband, I could have 200 back and forth if I was talking about sports.
Right.
But if I'm talking about, repairing something in the house, it's 2 and he's out of the door, So basically it has to do with the topic as well. And actually, I'm really glad you said that, because in my answer to Sarah, it is common. It's a lot of different things. And let's talk about some of those things that lead to our kids having a hard time. This is a good phase you're in right now, Sarah, by the way. They will pass this phase, but you need to do a couple of things to get them to understand what you're trying to get. So some of this, okay, let me just start with the very basic. The basic is make it a visual thing. So first of all, you don't know what's going on in their day, so it's very hard for you to prompt and ask questions. So if you can, ask the teacher or someone in school to give you a very, very short, like a few bullet points of something that happened in a little notebook, or somehow, get an idea of some of the things that took place in the school on that day, right? So that you can help prompt it when he comes home. You can start with just one very basic phrase, and hopefully it's the most important thing that happened during the day, because let me tell you, after our kids learn the concept of telling you some of the things that happened when you were absent, they tell you too much.
Right.
And then now you have to go to another lesson, which is just tell me the key points, not every single thing, And so, but either way, like, you will need to have some information so that you can prompt it and get them to dialogue with you. That's one thing. The second thing is, if they're home with you, one of the ways that you can do this, or even in school, is that you can have a series of pictures of their day, so that you kind of have like a schedule board. Think of it that way. Like, first we had breakfast, then we got dressed, then we went to school or whatever. I don't know if they're going to school right now, but whatever it is, and then, came home, whatever, just that, so that he learns the concept of sequencing his activities according to time. This is very difficult for our kids at 5. So if you ask a typical 5-year-old, girl would be different than boy at this point, but girls will usually tell you the whole sequence, and boys will tell you just 1 or 2 things out of order. Usually the most important things are important to them, right? So either way, you just need to be able to prompt that. So you need to have the knowledge. You can use visual boards to prompt it. You can ask a lot of questions to prompt it, and you can get the language going. It doesn't have to be, you should probably practice the skill on a weekend when you've actually been with him the whole day, so you know what's going on, and then transfer it to, let's say, an activity where you haven't been there, right? And you can get knowledge from someone else. I do want to say that we realize that over time that one of the things that happens is there's a theory of mind deficit that impacts this. And theory of mind is this whole idea of perspective taking, the idea that our minds are separate. And sometimes our kids are wondering why you are asking them about what happened in their day. Why wouldn't you know? And that has to do with the fact that they don't separate your mind from their own mind. And they think everything that's in my head, you should already know. So why are you asking me this stuff? And it takes a little while. 5 is early. Again, theory of mind stuff starts to develop around 5. So it is something that you can expect, and it is just something that you will work through. As always with our kids, don't expect these things just to develop on their own. There's lots of different ways that you can practice these things and help your child to understand exactly what it is you're asking about.
Yeah.
And there's lots of basic lessons. Like even if you do like listening comprehension, like so-and-so went to the store and bought some apples, whatever. Yeah. Then just asking the child what happened, who went where, like what was the story, that kind of stuff helps the child be able to, what you're talking about here is summarizing and recalling, which are both individual skills that are important.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of lessons and skills come to mind about what's the one about saliency. Mm-hmm. What's the most important thing?
Important, yeah. But just recall, summarizing, like being able to summarize things. Just recall, that's a very important thing. Where did you go? Who does the listen to a story? Those types of lessons. Yeah. There's lots of lessons that work on this.
It makes me remember when Jem was going through this, there was a time when we were going to take a day and go to Disneyland.
Yeah.
And my mom was still alive. And I remember that the team had put together a bunch of stuff for us about Grandma's not going to Disneyland. So Grandma's not going to know what happens. And there were several things that I had to check in with Jem and go, okay, so when we're done, we're going to call Grandma. What should we tell her we
exactly,
did?
Exactly.
And then we kind of would talk through it. And then he called her. That was back in the day when Disneyland had phones, where you could make a phone call and call anybody, and it was free. And so he had to call Grandma from Disneyland. Oh, I
remember those.
Right?
Yes,
Like I'd forgotten about those. But he had to call Grandma and tell her like 3 things that he had done at Disneyland. And I got to work with him through the day. Because normally it was me that I wanted to hear.
Yep.
But they did it so that I could be there and see what he was going through. And he called Grandma and she was tickled pink.
Yeah. But that's exactly the way to do it, is to actually be there first so you can prompt it. And then gradually kind of start asking him about times when you're not there.
There you go.
And Sarah, it is it's a different skill than being fully conversational.
Yeah.
It's a part of the conversation, but fully conversational is lots of different other lessons, like having to do with just building sentences and being able to talk about things in different ways and understanding the other person's interests and staying on topic and being able to repair the topic when the other person looks bored and reading facial expression. And I mean, it's like a million different things before you become fully conversational.
Yeah. It's like putting Lego blocks together
Yeah.
and building an amazing thing.
Yeah.
But she also said, practice. It's good that we have support with the boys at school that write a daily journal with them. So we need to keep going with reviewing it at home with the boys. And she said, interesting to hear about the theory of mind piece.
Yeah. And then I see that Andrea actually wrote that she's also struggling with the whole conversation thing. And we've talked about conversation a few times. It's a pretty large set of lessons, and it starts with just making sure. Think about if any of you have learned, I don't want to say speak a second language, but have learned a second language later in life, and whether or not you become conversational has to do with a lot of different things. First of all, it has to do with vocabulary, just having adequate vocabulary, knowing the name of words. Secondly, it has to do with being able to put those words in the right order, right? Grammar.
Yeah.
And then third, it has to do, so once you have those, then comes in the social aspect of it, which are all the other things that I talked about, which is kind of like, why am I even telling you these things? So that brings in theory of mind, which is, hey, you weren't there and I'm telling you about it. But why? Like, what's my motivation to tell you about these things? And, like when you think about it with typically developing kids, the motivation behind conversation is the response they get from the other person. And so with other friends, it's one type of reward. And with you, it's a different type of reward, right? Like you want to know, as a good parent, kind of what happened during their day. And they will tell you that kind of stuff just because your response is usually going to be something that's along the lines of, oh, good job, oh, how interesting, or how can I help you solve that? Yeah. It's something that makes things better for them, your response, right? And a lot of times our kids on the spectrum don't get that. They don't really... First of all, the appreciation of your, that sense of pride, if my parents are proud of me, is not always there with our kids. We have to build that. We have to establish that over time. And secondly, they're just so kind of like working so hard on trying to put the sentence together that maybe the reinforcer they get from you is not really balancing out. It's not enough.
Yeah.
It's very hard for them to put those sentences together. So once they're able to do those types of things, and if you are rewarding enough and they get enough out of interacting either with you or with others, and by the way, language development or conversational development with other kids tends to be a lot more easier, more rewarded, etc., than it is with us, with adults. So once they get the reward and everything, then it's a matter of teaching all those subtle social things, which is the topic, staying on topic, repairing the topic, paying attention to body language, which tells me people are bored, or I should change the topic, taking turns. That's a big part of conversational language, allowing the other person to talk about the things they're interested in, listening actually to what they're talking about and having a comment. These are all things that that you can learn, though, and it is possible to learn these things. It's just a little bit more advanced.
There we go. Saying hi to Lori and to Reza. We're going to get to your questions in just a second, as well as Armand. But Reza had written back in. She was the one who said he says no to everything. Yep. She said, I think he knows the meaning and he means it. We have not tried to give him rewards when he says no.
Yeah. So offer him, don't look at it as a reward, just offer him a thing he likes and a thing he doesn't like, right? And you need to teach him when he says no, that thing goes away. And if he wants something and says no, that it doesn't matter, that thing is still going to go away. And if he really wants something and you're about to take it away, teach him to say yes. Yeah. Right? So help him differentiate. Like, I want the lollipop. So when you offer it to him and he likes lollipop, we actually, as opposed to, let's say, something that's sour that he won't like, right? So help him differentiate. When you give him the lollipop, say yes. So he'll say yes. And when you give him, are you thinking about the video? Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny how you can read my mind after
Yeah.
all these years.
Well, I mean, it's just that like so old videos that we made such a long time ago. Different. That was Logan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Logan Shepherd. And it just shows a therapist with salad dressing and a lollipop.
That one was theory of mind, though. That was trying to teach Logan to read her expression
Yes.
based on her facial reaction
Yeah.
to the salad dressing and the lollipop. It was such a good video. I have
It's
that.
crazy. Who is that?
It's Lisa Brownfield, another
Okay.
therapist we used to have.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know her. But that video is like burned in my head.
Yeah.
Okay. So Raina says, good morning. I think it's their child is a Gestalt language
yeah.
learner. And I'm also unsure how she learns the meaning of language, but I don't discourage the scripting. It is a problem at times, and I have to wait when she scripts from her favorite shows, but I also believe it helps her give meaning to the words and sentences.
Great. Good to know.
Good to know. Okay. Want to get to Armin's question, and then his question kind of goes with a question that we had that was sent in. Armin says, my son shows improvement only with speech pathologists. We didn't see improvement in ABA. I noticed that most of the RBTs don't know how to use techniques. What should I expect from ABA? And somebody else had written in and said, speech is the single most important goal for my child, but I am being told to prioritize ABA over speech. Can you tell me why?
That's great. That's really good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is going to be very specific to the people you are working with.
Yeah.
So yes, this is correct. First of all, there are techniques in the production of speech, not in the growth of language, but in the production of sounds that only some speech therapists are trained in. For example, prompt training. Prompt training is a process that some speech pathologists have gone back and earned a certificate in, which has to do with touching various locations of the child's face or mouth to prompt the child to produce a sound. Because, like if you're trying to get a child to say "buh" or something, it's very hard, right? Unless you actually teach them where they are supposed to emphasize, like close their lips, put their tongue, etc. Prompt training does work. And sometimes when I have a non-verbal child who I know has sounds, who I know is able to produce sounds but isn't able to produce words, I will get a prompt trainer, a speech therapist who's trained in prompt to help me get that going.
Yeah.
That aside, you can also have really, really good speech therapists who are just able to connect with, they have access to very good programs on their iPads or lessons, and they're very good. And you can do 20, 30, 40 hours with that speech therapist if you can, but nobody will ever do it. Speech therapists will basically limit the amount of time they're working with your child commonly to 3 hours a week, maybe 5 hours a week. That's it, right?
And you wouldn't get funding for anything more than that. You'd have to pay out of pocket.
That's very true. That's a very true point too, because the standard of care for speech is like having a child who has slight speech delay and getting them to increase their speech somewhat, right? And so it is minimal. It's minimal. And when you go to school and get that funding, it's always going to be something like, I'll give you 1 hour of speech therapy one-on-one, and then you can get maybe 2 half hours in a group. It's just not enough, and it's not going to be focused enough on your child's issues. Yeah. With ABA now, let's talk about the other side. You might have ABA therapists who don't have any idea how to teach your child speech. Let's start right there. And that's not good. And you need to find ABA people who actually do have a planned curriculum, who know how to work together with speech paths if you're at the point of just initiating sound, who know how to build a language. Like that involves all the way from echoics, teaching them correct imitation of sound, teaching them how to intonate correctly, how to produce words correctly, how to connect words to objects, connect words to actions, how to build those into sentences, how to use those sentences Now we're entering the world of language, right? Using speech to communicate is language. And so you can have really, really good people teaching that stuff. And then the good thing is, as Shannon said, because the standard of care in ABA is much more intensive, therefore you're going to get your insurance company to pay for 30, 40 hours. And you are going to go more rapidly. So there's a big overlap. It's a matter of finding a much, who's best, who at this point in my child's life, and then also making sure that you do intensity and moving forward.
But in the balance of, in the perfect world, in the perfect world, you would have a speech and language pathologist who did understand all this and was amazing and was great at rapport with your child and could, help your child with production of sound and prompting sound. And you would be doing intensive ABA with a team of people who also were using ABA techniques to get your child to begin making sounds and using them to communicate. Like, that's
Definitely
the ideal.
Yeah, I agree. And I think because in that scenario, what you end up usually getting is like the ABA therapists are working around the clock, and then the speech therapist is advising and consulting with your supervisor a couple times a week. That's the ideal.
Yes, that's the absolute ideal. Often people don't have the ideal for various and sundry reasons.
Right.
But for the person who wrote in the question and said, if speech is the priority, why am I being asked to prioritize? Because so often what happens is that the ABA team says, we really believe that your child needs 30 or 40 hours, and we're trying to squeeze that in. And now suddenly the 1 hour of speech therapy is making it so you lose a whole day because the mom has to drive them across town.
Well, that's very true as well.
Right?
That's very true as well.
I'm in those conversations with parents on a daily basis.
Yes,
where
you're absolutely
I'm like,
right.
you have a choice here of having 1 hour of speech, or you can get 7 hours of ABA.
Right.
But if you take speech at 12:30 in the afternoon and your
whole
2
day
hours,
is shot.
the whole day is shot.
Yeah.
I think that's why some people are saying, look, you got to weigh how good is that 1 hour going to do, or is the 7 hours? But of
Very
course,
true.
as you say, like, how good are the people doing it?
How good are the people doing it? But this was a perspective that I didn't have, that yes, one could interrupt the other.
And it does.
What I try to tell parents, though, is that you have to realize speech and language are behaviors, and ABA deals with behaviors.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what people don't realize, is that everything we do is a behavior. And the biggest part of ABA is speech and language, the biggest by far. So when we teach, when you look at a comprehensive curriculum for the stuff that we teach, like a lot of people, I want to talk about this for a minute, because a lot of people think ABA, Shannon, has just to do with challenging behavior, and that is not the case. Challenging behavior is communication, and what ABA is trying to teach the child or adult more appropriate, more adaptive communication that replaces the challenging behavior. So ABA is really all about what we teach, right? Not just what we reduce, but all the stuff that we teach in order to get the child to interact appropriately, as opposed to using their challenging behavior to interact. So what are those things that we teach? And like, for instance, for us at CARD, we have a curriculum where it divides into 8 different sections, and they are language. The largest curriculum is language, and by far. Then after that, we have social, which is our second biggest area. Then we have play, of course, for our younger children. We have motor skills, because there are children whose motor skills delay everything else, including language, by the way. That's a very important thing too. It's like, sometimes your motor skill is so delayed that has to come first before you can speak. And then we have adaptive skills, which are self-help, daily living skills, that sort of stuff. And we have academic, of course, for kids who are struggling with academics in school. And then we have, let's see, what am I missing? Cognitive skills, obviously, that are very advanced kind of problem-solving, theory of mind type stuff. Executive functions, which are very, very important to a lot of our kids. Planning activities. I named all of them 8.
Look at you. Okay.
So basically language is a big, huge portion of an ABA program. And that's very important to note, because a lot of people are like, why am I doing ABA? I don't have challenging behaviors. I just need speech.
Can I say, though, that one of the things that I've been encountering lately are parents writing in and saying, well, my hours are being reduced because my BCBA says are challenging behaviors, but my child doesn't have the ability to communicate. That makes me crawl.
Very mad. Yes, I agree. And it's unfortunate, honestly. It's very sad that happens. I think it even happens at CARD, to be honest, because there are some BCBAs that are like young and they were taught this way. Well, whereas, you know, the more you've been in the field and the more you realize that it doesn't have to do with all the behavioral techniques. They're very important, like extinction and DRO, all the techniques that we learn to eliminate or reduce challenging behavior. But challenging behavior will always continue to come back unless there's an appropriate replacement.
But I wonder if part of it is that insurance companies, I always look at it and go, is the tail wagging the dog? Because insurance companies, I don't know, I haven't been through the process of what they look at when they reduce hours, but it seems like
it's so bad.
It seems like that if the child is having severe challenging behavior, they're like, okay, we need to pay for the ABA. And if the child isn't, they're like, see, we don't need it anymore.
Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff that they use to cut back. So that is one of them. They are very, very focused on challenging behavior, obviously. And they are also very focused on if the child, you know, so it depends on where you start, right? So if a BCBA goes in and their report only reports challenging behavior, and then you do really well with the challenging behavior, you can't suddenly pop in and say, oh, by the way, now I want to teach language, right? That has to be from the very beginning. Otherwise, the payer is going to say, are you coming up with reasons just to keep, it's like a doctor who keeps you in the hospital.
Right, right.
So that's not the whole thing. Whenever there's any kind of treatment plan, it has to involve all aspects, right? It has to start with the child's chronological age and say, what are we missing here?
Yeah.
What are the things that are important to this child, to this family? Challenging behavior will certainly be part of it. Yeah. But then there's other things that are extremely important. It's like training the parents so that the parents know how to communicate with the child when the ABA team isn't there. You know, teaching the child how to connect to people. And get their rewards from people, teaching the child language, communication, teaching the child self-care. Like there's a million things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's important for us as parents to advocate and push. And if a BCBA is like saying we're going to have to reduce the hours, to push the BCBA, remind them of whatever, because we need to be mindful of the fact that the BCBAs are also being pushed by the insurance companies.
They definitely are. There's no question about that. And one way you can, as a parent, I think, push the BCBA or, you know, continue your ABA program is to actually get an assessment done.
There you go.
Right. Every once in a while, I recommend that you see either a psychologist or even a developmental psychiatrist and get an assessment that shows where your child is still struggling. Yeah. And honestly, I don't care if it's language assessment, which you could also get from a speech pathologist, if it's a developmental assessment, which shows skills that your child's below on, if it's a neuropsychological assessment that shows that your child's memory is still impacted or whatever it is, find out what areas your child is struggling with and then find a good ABA provider who can teach those particular skills.
This is a really good point, because I think sometimes once we get started doing ABA, it doesn't occur to us to go and get an assessment. Sometimes people tell us, don't do that, don't pay money to do that, because if they find out your child's doing really well, they'll stop your services. But here's something that I was taught, which is go get the assessment. You don't have to disclose what it says to anybody. And you don't have to disclose.
Absolutely, that's yours.
But I think sometimes that doesn't occur to us, though. That like there were things that we chose not to disclose to different entities because it was our business. And other things that we did disclose. Yeah. Part of a thing that we chose to disclose because it helped our case. Yes. And other things we were like, I just don't need to tell you that.
Well, so everything that your child ever does or you ever do is owned by you. This is really important for people to realize, including all your records, including every piece of paper that has ever been written about your child or with your child or about you is owned by you. It is, what's the word that we use? It is stored by the provider, and it is cared for, taken care of. It's almost like they're your storage. But all of that stuff is owned by you. You can give permission or not give permission to whoever you want to share. And it's very, very, very confidential. Like someone can lose their license if they share your documents or your child's documents with anyone without your approval. So that's important to know. Now, remember though, when a provider, so your ABA therapist, signs a contract with your payer, with your insurance company, it is possible that you no longer have that level of confidentiality. And that's usually in your informed consent document that you sign with your provider. They'll be telling you, hey, listen, if your payer requests documents, we have no choice but to give it to them. So there's a level of you lose that if your insurance is paying for it. But if you go to like someone who's doing an assessment, and again, it depends. Most people who do assess, here's another very important thing: BCBAs don't do standardized assessments. This is really important for you to realize. A BCBA can give you a Vineland, let's say, which is an adaptive behavior assessment that you can fill out, a questionnaire, or your teachers can fill out, etc., and they can score that. But those are classified as like level 1 or A assessments. So these are assessments you can even get online, right? But standardized, aside from the Vineland, standardized assessments that are like neuropsychological assessments, skills assessments, things that are only psychologists or psychiatrists can access. These are level B or level C tests. Those are not done by BCBAs. They're never trained to do those assessments. They're done by licensed folks like psychologists or psychiatrists. And those are a separate provider altogether, right? So, and often psychiatrists and psychologists are not going to accept insurance funding for this kind of stuff, for assessments. Very often you're going to have to pay for it. And you're going to get from the psychologist or psychiatrist what's called a super bill. So it's a bill that itemizes everything they did and their rate and what it cost you. That you can send to your insurance, and then your insurance does have to cover that.
Okay.
But they don't have to pay the provider directly. That's very important to know. Super bills get you coverage. It's just the difference is the insurance is paying you instead of paying the payer.
But
the
does
provider.
that entitle them to the results of the test?
No, it doesn't. It's very private because the provider doesn't have a contract with your payer. They're not in network. And you have to realize most psychologists and most psychiatrists are not in network. They don't want to be in network.
Okay.
Because when you go in network, this is very important for people to realize, you accept a reduced rate.
Right.
And a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists don't want that.
Yeah.
They can make a good enough living without getting referrals from insurance companies. So they don't do that. They just have private clients paying them. But they still give you a super bill, and you send that to your insurance, and you'll get the majority of that covered.
But they're going to pay it based on out of network.
It's out of network.
Okay. So
correct.
You're going to end up paying part of it.
You're going to end up paying part of it.
But you won't have to pay the whole thing.
In most cases, because now we have parity, mental health parity, in most cases, 80% of your bill, even if it's higher, will be paid.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did not know this.
Yeah.
I did not know this.
Yeah.
This needs to be in my repertoire. I never heard super bill before.
Oh, yeah. So super bill is what you get from your doctor if they don't accept your insurance.
Does it say super bill on it?
Everybody, I don't think it says super bill on it, but everybody it's called a super bill. That means it's like super defined, very detailed.
I remember all those years ago when insurance started covering ABA, and I was like, I don't want to know what the words are. Yeah. And now I've had to be dragged kicking and screaming through so that I can at least, give information. But Oh my goodness. Super Bill was not in my repertoire. Now, jargon of the day, anyone? Yes. It'll be coming up soon.
Yes.
Okay. We have a couple of minutes left, and somebody wrote a question. We've been touching on this the whole show, but their question was, what is the most effective way to teach conversation? What method?
Yeah. Again, yeah. So, and I feel like it's conversation itself is such a frequently brought up topic on our shows that it might warrant that you and I sit down one day and pull out all the lessons in conversation and skills and go through each one.
Yeah.
Because parents ask about this all the time, and there's a sequence, and it's like if I was to look at I know that there's a subsection called social conversation and skills, and if I was to look under that, and then if I was to look under all the prerequisite lessons, I could produce some sort of a decision tree for parents because it's huge. Yeah. And as I said, it starts with just basic speech, then it goes to basic language, like describing things. Then it goes to interactive kind of language, just back and forth. And that's like where you will remember the lessons like statement, question. Teaching a child to, like if you say a sentence or a statement and teaching the child to say a similar statement or to ask a question, then let you answer it, and then for them to make a relevant comment. That exchange, that's its own process, and then going on forward to all the social nuances. What environment am I in? Who is this person I'm talking to? Am I understanding their intent properly? All that kind of stuff comes later. But we could do that. If you want, we could pull out all those lessons and then do a show just dedicated to conversation.
I think we should, because it feels elusive to parents. It feels like, and I will tell you, I think that part of the reason why is because speech is so limited and so much of it comes through school funding and it's like an hour a week. A lot of what happens with our kiddos is that they learn labels. Yeah. And we never get past that. Yeah. And the parents say, but I don't understand why some kids with autism are learning the conversation and my kid is just labeling or not talking about the thing that I need them to talk about, which, as you've said, this whole hour, it's so nuanced.
It is. And like I said, it's about, I think, actually, to answer that question, Shannon, that's a really good question. I think what happens is the majority of ABA providers only teach labels. They go up to that level. And if you look at all the verbal operants, which are based on, we don't have enough time to talk about what verbal operants are, but if you look at the verbal language learning, which comes all the way back from Skinner's book, Verbal Behavior, it is teaching labels. It is teaching first echoics, just imitation of sound or words, and then going to individual labels and whether they are under the concept of an object or a action or a function. Is always labels, right? Function, feature, etc. They're all labels. There isn't, when you look at the verbal operants, it's only at the point where you're teaching intraverbals, right, where you're getting to more advanced language. And there's not enough past that. Like, that's all there is. And it's all very scripted, even at the intraverbal level of teaching, right? But if you and I do this whole thing on conversation, there's a ton of stuff that's beyond that. Like, the majority of language and conversation teaching comes after those labels. The label part is the first year, and then after that, it's like so much more.
Right. Well, I think we need to do that then.
I think we should too.
So we will put that on the schedule. Yeah. All right. We are officially out of time here, but I want to, and we've had a couple of more questions. Huma, if you go back to the beginning, we talked about Gestalt at the beginning pretty intensively. And Raina said it had been hard breaking my child's scripting, especially when it's a song and we are doing therapies. Any pointers? I usually have to wait till she finishes the singing verse before I can get her attention.
Yeah, I know. And first of all, I mean, if your child is scripting more than they should, you need to identify the source of the scripting and maybe put a stop to it for a little while. A lot of times our kids excuse me, scripts from TV shows. You may want to alter those or stop that for a little while, because like let's just stop the pattern while we can teach the child more appropriate language. You teach her, if you stop that, then you can teach her actually other songs. What you're talking about, Reina, is getting your child's behavior, including language, under control, under what we call SD control or instructional control. And right now it looks like that's not the case. So you would be teaching similar things, but only when you ask your child to imitate them. So for instance, a song, but a different song, not the song that she's scripting.
Right. Okay. Well, amazing. Programming notes tomorrow on the show. We're going to be talking about the gut microbiome, and we've got a guest. James Schultz is going to be with us talking about research that they're doing on the gut microbiome. So that'll be very interesting. On Monday, we're kind of changing it up. We're scheduled to have Dr. Jed Baker, but we think we're going to move him around a little bit because he's got to travel that day. So I think we're going to do Let's Talk Movies, or there might be a parent to parent then. But on Tuesday of next week, we do have Ask Dr. Doreen. And then we've got a wonderful self-advocate Wednesday. Caden is going to be with us. So we're looking forward to all of that. We'll keep you posted tomorrow on the schedule changes for next week. But that's what we're doing for the next week. Looking forward to being here with you guys. We'll be back tomorrow, as I said, talking about the gut microbiome. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. And thank you to Dr.
Thank you so
Doreen.
much. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Don't forget, you can watch Ask Dr. Doreen live every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We hope to see you there.